I'm on mute. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this LinkedIn Live. Um, we are talking today about a topic that I know is very relevant for a lot of people. It's burnout. And I felt like this was a good time to talk about this. It's August, and I feel like August is one of those weird in between months. It's almost the start of school. It's almost the end of summer, but we're kind of in the middle of a limbo. And as we start to think about the rest of the year, it can really be um, a little overwhelming to think about all the things that we know are coming in the fall and in Q4. So I wanted to share some tips if you are burned out, worried about burning out, trying not to burn out, some things that have helped me personally to beat burnout. And before I give you the tips, first of all, I'm going to keep it simple today. I normally give 5 tips. I'm only going to give 3 because if you're contemplating burnout, then you're probably already a little overwhelmed. And also, I want to give you a little bit of backstory as to why exactly um, I have any right to come up here and talk to you about um, burnout and what it means and strategies for how to beat it. So about 11 or 12, maybe 13 years ago, not very many people know this, but I went through an experience of extreme burnout. Um, I'm not talking about like, oh, I need a vacation. This was clinical exhaustion, clinical depression. It took me 2 to 3 times as long to do everything because I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't focus. And the scariest part was I started having memory gaps. And I'm not talking about, oh, yeah, I forgot about that meeting or that conversation I had, a couple of weeks ago. This would be like days after I had had a fairly extensive conversation with someone. I would have sworn on a stack of Bibles that that whole interaction never even happened because things just weren't getting recorded in my short-term memory. Once I sort of got that wake-up call and figured out what was going on, I said, all right, I need to do something about this. And I started, like a lot of people do, doing research on burnout and what it is that you can do to try to beat burnout. There wasn't as much about it then as there is now, but what I did find, quite frankly, underwhelmed me. There were a lot of things like, oh, look for a new job. Well, first of all, I didn't want to look for a new job. I liked the job I had. There was just too much of it. And second of all, if you're actually burned out, you don't have the energy to look for a new job. So I was sort of like, all right, how do I get up from this? And what I ended up doing was taking a lot of the sort of standard tips that that I had read or that people had given me and kind of putting my own spin on them, tacking a corollary onto them. So I'm going to share 3 of those today and tell you how I implemented them then, how I implement them now, because these are strategies that I still use. The first strategy has to do with thinking about how much work you can actually reasonably get done. And the tip that I tell people here is to think of your calendar as a bookshelf. Now, I did not plan the fact that I was going to have some empty bookshelves behind me. I just moved into a new office last week and I haven't brought all my new books over, but it's a perfect setup for this. I read a book on time management from a woman who is actually a professional organizer to start with. And she made a great comparison. She said, imagine your calendar as a bookshelf that is 24 inches long. You could have a stack of books that is 28 or 30 inches tall, and those books are not going to fit on that shelf. It's just a physical space limitation. The shelf is your calendar, and the books are the tasks. And no matter how hard you try, you can't expand that bookshelf length, right? We all get 24 hours. So I started realistically thinking about everything, and I mean everything that needed to go on that proverbial shelf. Sleep, exercise, grocery shopping, cooking dinner, obviously professional work. And within the work context, I sort of took stock of what is everything that I am supposed to be doing and roughly how long in the space of a quarter, we worked in quarters, would that take? And I ran my estimates by people, and everybody said, "Oh, that's super conservative." With assuming a 50-hour work week, the job itself had 14 weeks worth of work that I was supposed to try to fit in a 12-week quarter. Um, of course, the strategy I had been using had been to take those sleep and grocery shopping and self care books off the shelf. But that didn't work so well. So I said, okay, if I have to fit but those books on the shelf, what else is going to come off? And I still use that metaphor as a way to think about, okay, what do I need to put on my bookshelf? And what do I have to take off in order to fit some other things on there? I just find that that physical metaphor is really helpful. So, my second tip has to do with how you then prioritize what goes on the shelf in the spaces between sleep and food and all of those normal things. And the lesson that I had to learn was I needed to stop waiting for other people to prioritize my work. I kept turning to managers, colleagues, my manager's managers, asking them for help, saying, "What am I not going to do?" Um, and they didn't give it. Some just didn't respond. Others came right out and said, "Oh, don't worry, you'll figure out how to do it all." And I was like, "Well, no, no, I won't because it's not possible." And I got mad and I got frustrated. But righteous indignation is the most useless emotion on the planet. So I said, okay, they are not going to give me priorities. Should they? Maybe. Will they? No. So I had to figure out how to make the priority calls for myself. And I created a little mental test as I was going through and deciding what I was going to do and what I was not going to do. And I said, could I, if I got called in front of the CEO of the company, could I explain why I chose to do what I did and ignore what I ignored, and why I believe that was the best decision for the company long term? That long term piece is important. Because obviously, I could continue doing more work than was healthy, but then in another 6 months, I wouldn't be able to help any clients. So once I started making my own priority calls and kind of playing out this worst case justification scenario in my head, which of course, by the way, never happened, I kind of washed my hands of it. I said, you know what? I've done all I can do. I've asked for help. I'm not getting it. Somebody said, well, your manager doesn't want to tell you what to ignore any more than you want to, because then they're responsible for that decision. And what if it's a problem? I said, okay, fine. And I just said, this is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm doing with it. And I would feel comfortable justifying that to anybody in the business. And that is the absolute most I can do. And I proceeded and got a lot of work done. Never once did I get called in front of anybody. All of the fears I had about making the quote unquote wrong decision around prioritization never materialized. And you know what? I got a lot more done. It was learning a skill that a friend of mine called strategic neglect, what to strategically neglect and not pay attention to. And once I took ownership and control of that and got to the point where I could internally feel comfortable that, I've done as much as I could, I was no longer dependent, and I wasn't burning all that energy being frustrated with other people for not making a call that I thought they should have made, but wouldn't. So my third strategy has to do with, okay, you've got this strategic neglect stuff, the stuff you're going to say no to. How do you do that? Because people used to say, oh, set boundaries, block off Friday on your calendar as your get work done day. One of my colleagues told me they had a policy that they didn't travel more than 2 weeks in a row. And so I had it in my head, okay, I was traveling for 2 weeks, so that means I can't travel this week. And I found that I was the own worst offender for breaking those boundaries because people would call me and I would say, "Oh, I can't, I've been traveling for 2 weeks. I get too burned out if I travel more than that, or Fridays are my get work done days." And um, what I did inadvertently was I immediately opened the door for them to challenge or debate why their thing was more important than my thing, whatever I needed to do, whether it was rest, recuperate, get actual work done. And so the trick that I learned and I still practice here is when you do have to say no, don't explain, offer alternatives instead. So let me tell you what I mean. Hey, Megan, I know you don't usually take meetings on Fridays, but I have this meeting, that it would be really important, be really good for you to do. And I would say, I'm sorry, I'm not available. How's Monday? Especially for people who didn't know or frankly didn't care that I had this, rule that I was trying not to take meetings on Fridays. If they just said, hey, I have this really important meeting, I'm sorry, I'm not available. How's Monday? That never gives them the in to try to debate with you and guilt you into letting go of your boundary and giving up whatever your time is for. It could be for knitting, it could be for yoga, it could be for anything. But whatever that time is that you set aside, when you don't give them an explanation as to why you're not available and you just say, I'm sorry, I'm not available, those sort of debates and guilt trips and that cajoling never has an opportunity to happen. Now, obviously, there will be situations like with travel specifically. Events are when they are. And if somebody says to me, can you speak at an event? And it's within that window where I've already spoken, I've already been traveling 2 weeks before. If I say, I'm sorry, I'm not available, there's a chance I might, lose that business or lose that opportunity. But that to me is the balancing of short-term and long-term revenue. We talk all the time about how we need to balance short and long-term considerations. I could violate my policy and take that extra trip and risk burning out again and not being able to serve clients for the week or the 2 weeks or the 3 weeks afterward because I'm exhausted. And I'm choosing for the sake of my customers not to do that so that the ones who already have a commitment with me get me at my best. That's one other thing. I didn't include this as a tip, but just one other thing that I'll throw in there. I actually had a colleague go to their boss when I said no, I couldn't take a project. This was very last minute toward the end of the quarter, and I was already booked up. And they went to their manager and they said, Megan is not being customer centric. Because I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Actually, what I said was, my first availability to do that is January. They wanted it done in December. I came back and said, whoa, wait a minute. First of all, I'm one of the most customer centric people most of you know. Second of all, I am being customer centric. I am thinking of all of the customers to whom I have already made a commitment. And my priority is to honor the commitments I've already made and give them my best. I'm not being fair to those customers that I've already made a commitment to if I take on too much and they get the grumpy, irritable, tired, can't think, can't concentrate version of me. I think for a living. That's literally what I do. And so after that, I actually felt better after that interaction because I felt like I was more prepared. I mean, so much of setting boundaries and not burning out is about getting comfortable saying no or getting comfortable disappointing people, which, life is about disappointment. People are going to be disappointed. It doesn't make you a bad person. But the more strategies I had down to literally what were the words I was going to say to people, the more comfortable I felt setting those boundaries. And the interesting thing that happened was that once I started setting those boundaries, everything took off. My work was better. I got promoted. My career was better. Just everything took off. So I actually was able to be more effective and be better at my job by doing less, but doing so very thoughtfully, while still taking into account the sort of psychology and needs of the other people around me. So I know none of these tips are rocket science. I also know that none of them are necessarily easy things to learn or do. They take practice, but learning these and testing these, even just testing, hey, I'm worried about setting boundaries because I worry that if I set a boundary, I'll get in trouble. You probably won't. But we never know because we never test those boundaries. Even just trying to set those boundaries, practicing that, I'm sorry, I'm not available, X, how's Y. Um, Almost every time, whatever it was able to wait until a day or two later. So I would encourage you to think about places and ways that you can start to experiment with these little things. Because ultimately, the thing about burnout is that I think a lot of it exists in our heads. And I don't mean that we're faking or we're pretending. I mean that we feel burned out because we were afraid of consequences and are afraid of doing things because of what they might create. But those scenarios that we're afraid of are really, really unlikely to happen. There was a saying, I think it was Mark Twain, that said, I've been through a lot of terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. And very often burnout comes from the fear of imagining the terrible things that in reality aren't very likely to happen. So hopefully that's useful to some of you. Take it back, think about it. If you want to chat individually, one-on-one, I am always more than happy to. This is a personal passion of mine. I really hate seeing good people burn themselves out. And in customer experience, frankly, we are more susceptible to this because we are so caring. We want to help everybody. Customer experience folks tend to be very giving. And so sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. So feel free to contact me, message me on LinkedIn, chat about this further, and take the next 12 minutes between now and the end of the half hour to, go get yourself some water. Go take a quick break and just breathe. Because it is possible to come out of burnout. It is possible to prevent burnout. It is possible to thrive after extreme burnout. And hopefully this has helped you come up with some strategies for how to do that. So thank you so much for your time. I will see you next month.